To another episode of Witty CFB. Your host Rob Sheply here. On today's episode, we have KevinMcGuffey joining us from Last Word on Sports. Covers all things Kentucky football. Kevin, it's great to have you on again. We last talked during the summertime, kind of previewing Kentucky football. Fast forward to November, it's definitely been a whirlwind season for him, finishing 5-7, just shy of getting into a bowl. And, just so many highs and lows between the dominant performance they had versus Florida, versus a couple heartbreaking losses versus Texas, and fast forward to the Governor's Cup this past weekend. Kevin, as you kind of, recollect and kind of think about how this season has gone, what have been your overall thoughts or takeaways in general?
Well, first of all, Rob, thank you for having me on again. I really appreciate it. It's always good to come in and talk some college football. Yeah, but the biggest thing is just, I hate to say, disappointment. They started obviously really poorly. That 3-game winning streak at the end in November is the first time since 2021 Kentucky won 3 straight games in November. Everyone was all excited, so we got back to 5-5. I put them in our. I do bowl projections also for Last Word. I even put them in our bowl projections, which is probably the proverbial kiss of death. So, um, and then you get to those, because they beat Florida, beat Auburn, beat Tennessee Tech. I mean, obviously an FCS school, but they were a top 10, top 5 FCS school at the time when Kentucky beat them. Yeah, then you get to those last 2 games and getting outscored. I think it was 86-17 or something like that. Is not a good way to end the season, and it kind of left a bad taste, I would say, in a lot of people's mouths. Generally, just disappointing, and so now we're going to spend another off season talking about Stoops and his future, and is there a future? Should there be a future? Uh, just from as we're talking now, there's been allegedly been discussions with Kentucky and everything, whether he's going to return. I'm still, if I were a betting person, I would say he will, but just generally, just another disappointing season, because after making 8 straight bowl games, now they've missed a bowl game the last 2 years. So now they got to figure out how to put some of these pieces together, keep some of the really good pieces that they have, and try to get this thing fixed for next year and see if can get back to a winning season, or at least 6-6 in a bowl game. But playing in the SEC, we know that's going to be difficult. So.
Yeah, and especially too, I as I was preparing for this episode, I was thinking about our conversation from the summertime, and I think the one thing I really enjoyed about our conversation was how optimistic you were about Kentucky in general, because a lot of people were kind of dismissing Kentucky, and you were the first one to say, hey, I believe this team can win 6 games. And I know Zach Calzada didn't work out like people thought, but you have Cutter Boley, who finished with almost 66% completion percentage. Mm-hmm. Obviously a little bit more interceptions than you would like with 12, but for the situation that they're in, I mean, he really kind of seems like a guy that you can at least build around, or someone that could be a really good insurance policy for Kentucky next year too. And especially with a lot of those offensive weapons, some of those guys some of those underclassmen really kind of came up clutch for you in certain moments of the year.
Right. Now you're 100% correct. And I think one of the things that a lot of people, myself included, have talked about was, should Boley have been the quarterback the whole time? Was whatever they spent to get Calzada in here, was it worth it? Could they have done something different? Now, I'm not saying that Kentucky would have won one of those couple games at the beginning if Boley had played. Excuse me. But we never know. That's kind of the big what if. And as you said, paramount for next year to have any kind of success, I think you have to keep Boley. He said after the Louisville game he plans on being here next year. Now we'll see how that, we know how that works in the transfer portal era. He as you said, he did some really, really good things this year, and and just going forward, I think he is the key to having a successful 2026. is having Bowley still here next year. Obviously, we'll see what happens. But yeah, I think I'm of the mindset. I think Bowley should have been the starter the whole season, and but obviously we can't go back and change that now. But that's just my opinion. I don't know if it would have made a difference in the win-loss record, but you never know. But like I said, but I think he's his position. They need to do everything they can to keep him here next year.
Yeah, exactly too. Because hindsight, just like you said, hindsight's always 2022. But I mean, when you kind of looked at the kind of layer of this team in general, I mean, we talked about Kendrick Law, for example. Harley Gilmore has had 28 receptions this year. So I mean, they've had some some production in terms of the receiver room and the deep and defensively speaking, they Kentucky, for the most part, is relatively consistent defensively, even though there's definitely been some disappointing performances here and there, particularly down the stretch, as you mentioned. But if you're Kentucky and you're kind of looking at this team holistically, what do you think are the top two things that come to mind that you say this absolutely needs to be fixed in order for Kentucky to see some progression next season, just schematically speaking?
I mean, I think one of the big things is the offensive line, and that's been for years. Kentucky was so good with the big blue wall, as they called it, but the last 2 years, especially this year, was a little better than last year. But some of the guys that they went out and got in the portal didn't quite hit like everyone hoped they would. I think that if you're going to keep Bowley, you've got to have a strong group up protecting him up in front, because right now Kentucky is on track to lose 4 of the 5 starters on the offensive line. So I think that's something you're going to have to hit the portal very hard, and try to find, and that's all the way it is with all this. You got to find the right guys that you think are going to fit your system. And the last couple of years, it hasn't quite worked out that way. I think that's the biggest thing on the offense. I think the secondary, like I said, they lose 2 starters on the defensive line. The linebacker position looks pretty solid, and then the cornerback position. I think they're pretty well, assuming they don't lose a lot of guys. I think they're pretty well set on defense. They had so many injuries at the end of the season this year. The last 2 games they were playing, I think, with 3 of the 4 top secondary players were out, plus the top linebacker. Playing against the Diego Javiers of the world. He was just, use the cliche, chomping at the bit to get at that Kentucky defense that day. And then, like I said, this year there's no, the way they lost, of course, would like a more competitive game, but losing to the best Vanderbilt team ever is no, whatever the word is, you don't feel, not that you don't feel bad, but it's a once in a generation team that they've had. But now losing to a Louisville team that was down their top 4 running backs, their top wide receiver, and a question of whether or not their quarterback was even going to play. That's the one that everybody here is having trouble. How they came out and just got thoroughly dominated, in the big rivalry game. But going back to your original point, I think the offensive line is something that has to be addressed. And then I also will throw in the running back position, Seth McGowan, who did a really, really great job coming in from New Mexico State. He'll be gone next year. They do have Dante Dowdell, the Nebraska transfer, assuming that he comes back next year. And they also have Jason Patterson. But I would not be surprised to see them maybe go after 1 or 2 guys for some depth in the running back position. But like I said, I think defense, they're pretty good shape. They do need some help up front, probably, if you were going to pick a position, because they lose 2. Like I said, they lose 2 of their 3 starters up front. So I would say, take your pick at those, probably those 3 positions. That's the ones that I would say that they need to address and quickly in the offseason. And of course, the weird thing about this year is that signing day is Wednesday. and I think I've seen several coaches talk about this. It's like I'm trying to prepare get my team ready for a conference championship game, and I've got to worry about signing day on Wednesday in the middle of it. It's like it doesn't make any sense now. Because it's 2 weeks. I think 2 weeks earlier this year than it's been in the past. So, and right now Kentucky only has 12. I think it's only 12 or 13
Yeah,
players.
12, yeah.
Yeah, signed for next year. I think they had I think they had a decommitment or two in the past week, but then they talked about Stoops and the staff talked about they were gonna really go after the junior college ranks this year, and they did have some good success with the junior college ranks and even at like the FCS level, bringing up guys. So they may not, and it's part of that win. I guess part of the win now mentality. You get somebody who's played 2 or 3 years at a school, and hopefully you can plug them right in and pick up your offense and your defense and get right at it, as opposed to a freshman who you may have to wait a year or two. So,
well, that's the balance you're trying to find, right? Because I would argue that that's probably a little bit more effective for the defensive side of the ball, considering
right.
how well experienced Brad White is. You can pretty much always trust their secondary. I mean, if you think about over the years, how many of those guys have turned into NFL prospects. But I think also too, I remember talking about this in the summer with you about how Bush Hamden's offensive scheme in general would kind of translate to the season in general. I think one of the things because of you, I actually watched a lot more Kentucky football this year, so that was kind of cool to think about in hindsight now.
You're welcome. I think maybe I don't know.
No, I mean, I just hey, I always just try to keep an open mind, and especially, we talked off camera about the Florida game, but
right.
I think that's one of the big things too about this team as I was watching is just kind of how much they changed, at least offensively speaking, because towards the beginning of the year we kind of thought that especially with Calzada coming in from Incarnate Word, where they were generally a pretty pass heavy team compared to the Mark Stoops offenses that we've seen in years past, where they're primarily running the ball. I think just that kind of evolution of how Kentucky's offense has changed has been interesting to watch. But I would also argue that there were some more positives than anticipated.
Yeah, no, especially when you got towards the end of the season, especially during that 3-game winning streak, if you watched them, you noticed they became more of a pass oriented team, and trying to play to Bowley strengths, and then like I said, Kendrick Law, Hardly Gilmore, Fred Farrier, Jamari Macklin, a lot of these guys, and then they had two really freshman wide receivers, both named Miller, DJ Miller and Cam Miller. Those are two guys that they really need to keep next year as well, because both of them showed some really good flashes of brilliance, and especially in the middle towards the end of the season. Those are two guys that they need to keep for next year. But yeah, you're right. If you think about Mark Stoops, you think about the ground game, you think about the Benny Smells, the Chris Rodriguez's, the Boom Williams. That strong, and Kentucky's always going to have that running game. But something that a lot of the fan base was appreciative of was kind of airing it out, throwing the ball more, because it's going way back. The air raid back in the day, the air raid with Hal Mummy and Mike Leach kind of got its start here, and there's a large portion of the fan base that still wants that offense run every year. Like even if you're losing 60-40, you're at least scoring 40 points. The games are entertaining. Like I said, as long as Stoops here, they're never going to get away from the running game. And like I said, McGowan did a great job this year, and Dowdell did a good job this year too. But yeah, like I said, I think when Bush Hamden, they opened up the offense more, you saw better results. And like I said, just the last 2 games, things just didn't, for whatever reason, things just didn't work out the way the Big Blue Nation wanted it to, whether it was injury or just, like the offensive line, let's be honest, the offensive line struggled the last 2 games. Vanderbilt was in the backfield constantly, and Louisville, kind of the same way. So again, tying back to what you said previously, the offensive line, I think they've got to go out and find some guys that will gel and mesh, and they can plug in that system this year. But yeah, but I think the Kentucky fans, if we see a continuation of that trying to pass the ball more offense, I think people will be a little more excited, I think, than they are right now with the program, because right now the general, if I can use the word meh, that's kind of the general thought around the program right now, because honestly, a lot of folks are not excited about year 14 of Mark Stoops, but because the guy that everyone in the Big Blue Nation wanted as the new coach is now going to be coaching at Florida. So, Jon Sumrall, former player, former assistant coach here, and a lot of that kind of, I think, falls on athletic director Mitch Barnhart, that basically he's had 2 years to try to get something done, but nothing's happened, and we're going to get, I think year 14 with Stoops, and it's going to take a whole lot to win the fan base. I mean, you're going to have the hardcore people, of course, that are going to support the team, going to be there at Kroger Field no matter what. But the fringe crowd, the fringe audience or whatever, it's going to take a while to get them back. Maybe going to have to start off the season big next year. So that's just kind of the way it is right now. I mean, like I said, a lot of people, a lot of folks aren't happy with the way the program's going, because you had the 2 10-win seasons in 4 years, and then since then it's been 7-6, 4-8, and 5-7. So Stoops is, as it said on the scroll here, like Stoops is taking this program to heights it's never seen, but it's obviously over the last couple of years, especially, it started to plateau, and we got to figure out a way to keep this thing from bottoming out. So. But that's why he gets paid the $9.5 million a year. So he's trying to figure that out, him and his staff. So
yeah, and I mean this might be something that I think would encourage Kentucky fans, but I'd make the argument that if Kentucky was bold enough to let go of Stoops, I think Jon Sumrall is the type of guy that would have taken the Kentucky job over the Florida and the Auburn job.
Yeah,
I do genuinely believe that.
Yeah, I think so too, and I think that's what's the most frustrating thing with what we're talking about with the Big Blue Nation, that the fact that he could have been there for the taking, and now we'll never know. We'll see what happens when he gets to Florida. Maybe they don't improve on what they've been doing the last few years. I kind of doubt it, but yeah, like I said, and if something, if something at this point, if something was to happen with Stoops, the 2 biggest names that we keep hearing are both assistants. Will Stein, who's at Oregon, and then Brian Hartline at Ohio State, which ironically, both of those players have ties. They both played at Louisville, but those are as something. And then Dan Mullen's name has come up in conversation too. We're getting way ahead, just speculation, but like I said, I could be wrong. Might get off of here and find out that they decided to make a change. But yeah, those are the 2 names that are coming up. But like I said, the name that everyone wanted was Jon Sumrall, and it makes sense. Like I said, he played here, he was a coach here, and during some of Kentucky's biggest years under Stoops. So it seems like a missed opportunity. Now I know there's the albatross, or whatever words you want to use, of the $38 million buyout, because the contract that Stoops has, I think it's if he's fired, he gets all $38 million within like 60 days of his being fired. None of this will give you $5 million a year for the next 9 years, or the famous Bobby Bonilla New York Mets contract, where he gets paid. He's been getting paid $1 million on July 1st for like the last 20 years, and I think it goes for like another 10 years or something. So, but yeah, so that's kind of the big sticking point. And like I said, Barnhart has, and not just with football, and even some of the other sports, he's loyal to his coaches. And like Nick Mingione in baseball, Kentucky struggled a couple years. There was talk of whether or not he would be back. Mingione gave Barnhart gave him another year, and Kentucky went to the College World Series in 2024. And a lot of the minor I don't want to say minor sports, the non-revenue sports, Kentucky is actually killing it. Like I said, the baseball team has done great things. The volleyball team is ranked, I think, #1 in the nation. They won a national championship a few years ago. The women's basketball team is really good. Like the rifle team, the golf, all these different teams are doing great. It's just, most people talk about baseball and football, basketball and football. Barnhart gave John Calipari the lifetime contract that he could have stayed here forever. And then Calipari decided it was time to go and, save the university $40 million basically by going to Arkansas. And then now Kentucky has Mark Pope, who I think, is having a little bit of a struggle this year, but I think we'll get it they'll get it figured out. And then, like I said, then the same thing with Stoops. But what people forget is that when Barnhart gave Stoops that contract, it sounds weird now as we're talking at the end of 2025. In 2022, Stoops was like one of the hottest names in the coaching circuit. His name, they had just come off that second 10-win season, and Kentucky started 2022 4-0 when they announced the deal. So, his name had come up at Iowa and I think Michigan State and a couple other places. He
Texas
was
A&M too.
Of course, famously Texas A&M, where depending on who you ask, he either took the job and then said no, or decided not to, or was offered the job and then the A&M boosters and everybody said no, we don't. This ain't going to work. And of course, now they got Mike Elko, and then things have worked out pretty well for him, minus that loss to Texas. Yeah. But yeah, I think we'll see. Like I said, I would be surprised if we don't have year 14 of Mark Stoops, and we'll see. Maybe he'll be even more motivated to get things going next year. But we'll see what happens. So it's going to be an interesting off season, definitely here in Lexington.
Yeah, because I mean, I heard the press conference at the end of the year saying like, "Hey, there's no way I'm stepping down and everything." And the other thing I'll give Kentucky credit for too is the fact that they didn't just impulsively say, "Hey, we didn't have a great result at the end of the season. We're just gonna can them immediately and not have an immediate plan." So, I was afraid that Kentucky would almost turn into the SEC version of Penn State in the sense that you fire a guy who's well respected, who's brought up, who's elevated the program at least to a degree, right? And then let's say they didn't get Jon Sumrall, then I think there would be definitely a conversation in terms of, where do you kind of go from here in terms of, hey, do you go the route that your competition has and going after a G5 head coach, or do you swing for the fences and go after a guy like Jimbo or Ed Orgeron or John Gruden or what have you?
All right. Ed Orgeron would be an interesting name. I don't think it's going to, I don't think it's going to happen. We get, instead of Go Tigers, we get Go Wildcats, I guess. But sorry, that was really bad impersonation. But anyway, yeah, like I said, if it came to it, like I said, those are the three names that I mentioned earlier that people are talking about the most. But I said, I think Kentucky is, I think it's a good job. It's an attractive job. It can be, like I said, there's a fan base. It is so ready, and they show up most weeks. They're ready to support. They're ready for a winning team, and they're ready to throw the support behind whoever the coach is. If just assuming you're getting the results on the field. So, like I said, some of those names would be interesting. I can't see John Gruden would be really fun. I just don't think that one's gonna, that's probably a dream, but that would be exciting as all get out if something like that was to happen. But like I said, Will Stein and Hartline and like I said, Dan Mullen's name has come up. And the talks, the things that I've seen on the various message boards and the people who claim to be in the know or whatever, but kind of thing. So
yeah, I think this past carousel cycle has definitely been another lesson in terms of you cannot trust everything on the internet.
Right.
There's been I've seen so many conflicting reports in terms of, I even read a report about Schoolish going to Arkansas with Trey Schapp, a guy, well-respected journalist who covers Arkansas. So it's just very difficult to kind of navigate what's true versus what's BS versus what's just something Yeah.
Right, and that's that's kind of the age that we're in right now. People can literally just get on the Twitter. I still call it Twitter, and just post something kind of ridiculous, and then you just need one person to go with it, and then and like I said, and it's happened, and most of the time, but like I said, yeah, there's been some of the well respected journalists that occasionally will get information wrong, but yeah, it's just it's just weird, like I said, because I think he was linked to several different places, and then like Sumrall was linked to several different places, and then we won't get him started on the whole Lane Kiffin thing. But he said the best. I think the best comment I heard was that he's the only person who managed to blow up a bridge while he was still on it, or something like that. But somebody like him, he would be. It would certainly be entertaining if he was at Kentucky, but like I said, I don't see that one. Obviously, that ship sailed. He's going to Baton Rouge, and I have a couple of good friends who are LSU fans, and I haven't actually talked to him yet today. I was trying to see try to gauge their excitement over it. So they seemed very excited earlier in the week when they thought this was a possibility. So
Yeah, especially the 180 going from the fans in Oxford versus the fans in Baton Rouge. I'm sure it's night and day, and obviously, that's still kind of unraveling in terms of the contract and all that stuff too, and especially Ole Miss's path now into the college football playoff. But Kevin, I appreciate being generous with your time and talking some Kentucky
oh yeah,
football. And yeah, definitely follow him on Last Word on Sports. I'm gonna have his Twitter info and also a link to his work on Last Word on Sports. Definitely check that out.